Hey guys, this is Hayes with CheatSheetPros.com. Today is Thursday, December 28th, and I'm going to take a look at a few sports betting picks and show you kind of what's popping on the cheat sheet for me today. So if you're doing any type of sports betting, the first thing you want to do is open up the NBA cheat sheet and go over here to the scoreboard tab. And that is right here. You can see we have lots of tabs. If you're doing props, prize picks, or even if you're playing DFS, we have our own custom little rankings and whatnot. But over here on the scoreboard tab, this is the first place we're going to look. Now, your point edge is in this column. So typically, I leave it at a 1.5, but if you want to see a difference of 3 or 6, you can see it changes when you put that number in. So just looking at 1.5. And again, with NBA, you have to be careful because a lot of players are in, they're out. Things change drastically. So I always leave it at 1.5, and you can even put 0, and it will kind of give you an edge on each side. But for our default, we're just going to do 1.5, and these are kind of the recommended games to look at. They're not necessarily recommended plays, but they're a difference between our model and what Vegas has. So over here you can see we've got the record, last 10, any current streak. Look at this, Detroit 0-27, last 27, they've set an NBA record. And then we've got the Vegas lines, and then we have our cheat sheet line here. So what we're doing is we're comparing these two lines, and we're looking for differences. Now the difference here is going to be in the edge. So you can see, which team we think is going to be different. So for example, Boston and Detroit, this is the first game up here. And you can see it's minus 17. Well, that's a huge number. You can see we've got it minus 29. That's basically because Boston's been killing everybody, and there's a difference here of 25 points of what they've averaged just over the last 3. ATS-wise, Boston's ahead, Detroit's getting killed. But you can't feel good about laying 17 points, so that's not a game that really jumps out at me. When we're flipping down here, the side that jumps out at me that we're going to take a look at is going to be Utah and the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, you can see they're both 6-4. Utah's got a 3-game win streak. Points per game average last 3. Utah's 125, Pelicans 114. I don't focus a lot on that, but I do like to see when I like a team that is averaging really well. Against the spread, they're 53 and 57%, so they're doing very well. And I was kind of shocked to see a line of 8. So the first thing that I did was I went and looked and made sure that Lauri Markkanen, Sexton, and Clarkson are all playing. Right now, they all have props up, so it appears that they are all going to play. And on our model, you can see we have a projected score of 115.9 to 115.7. So we pretty much have it pick 'em. And then Vegas is giving Utah 8 points. So I like Utah plus 8. So that's one of the games that jumps out at me because we have a 8.2 point difference between our line and what Vegas says. So that's a game that would kind of jump out at me that I would want to take a look at and consider. Coming down here, Dallas, Minnesota, 10, that's a ton of points. I would lean Dallas, but it's not one that jumps out at me. Flipping down here, Chicago, we've got some differences. If our model weighs to the under, I kind of stay away from it. I'm not into betting unders. But Memphis and Denver, this is one where the over jumped out at me, but it doesn't show up on our model, and we're going to go over that, and I'm going to show you why. We have it at 224.5, or Vegas does. Our model has it at 225.1, so we're pretty much the same as Vegas. We just have a slightly different score. You can see here, these are both underplays. Statistically, they're averaging a combined 233.7 over the last 3 games, and I like the over 224.5, but I want to go in and look at the bet tab, and I'm going to show you why I like that game. Flipping down here to some of these other games, the other game I want to look at is game number 7 on our sheet, and then the over in the Miami Golden State game, that's another one that jumped out at me. Real quick, the last 3, they're averaging a combined 241.7 points, and Vegas has it at 228.5, and then my model has it at 232. So they're averaging over what Vegas has. My model has it over what Vegas has, so that's a game. I'm not saying run out and bet it, but that's a game that you should look into a little further. So that is the third game that we are going to take a look at. Now, once I look at this and I kind of get an idea of the games that I like, I kind of do what I call an earmark. You know, I jot them down on a piece of paper like, hey, let's go look at this game. This jumps out at me. And then I'm going to come over here to this bet tab down here at the bottom. Now, over here on the bet tab, let me slide over so you can see this. I'm going to make this a little bigger for you. Okay. Now, inside the home team, when you click this, it's going to slide up and down, and you can pick the different games. So you're going to pick the home team, and the away team up top changes automatically by itself. So the first game we're going to take a look at was Utah and... oh, who was it? Utah and Pelicans? Okay. So here you can see our model, which is on the scoreboard tab, kind of what we're projecting. So we pretty much have it pick 'em. Vegas is giving them 8, so Utah plus 8 is one that jumps out at me. A couple of things that I'm going to take a look at over here are the trends I want to take a look at. So their ATS 3-game win streak. They're 10-3 at home, but they're only 6-11 on the road. Well, they are on the road, so that would tend to look down, but we are getting 8 points. The second thing I want to look at are prior matchups. So this PR, you can kind of scroll down this column and this column, and I put these 3 little less than, greater than signs when they've played before. So here we see Utah. They've played the Pelicans twice, on November 25th and 27th. They were at home both times, and they're on the road now. And they won both games. They won 114 to 112, so it was a tight game with a total. They put up 226. And then they won 105 to 100. So both games were fairly close. 2 points, 5 points, and now we're getting 8 points, but they're on the road. I think that's a fair line. The third thing I'm going to look at are recent games. So I want to go look at the last 3 to 5 to 10 games. So looking at Utah, they've played 4 games on the road. This is going to be their 5th game in a row. But they've won 3 of these 4 games, and they've won 3 in a row. Now, beating Detroit, that's not very impressive, but they did beat Toronto on the road, and the Spurs, that's not very impressive as well. But they've won by 12, 7, and 8 points. So they're shooting really well. They put up 130, 126, and 119 points, so that's pretty positive. They also have 2 wins under their belt against the Pelicans previously. And then looking at the Pelicans' last 4 games, they've been beat by Memphis twice. Now, these were close games, so I don't just look at the loss and be like, okay, they lost, blah, they suck. You know, they lost by 1 and they lost by 2. So those were tight games. They could have gone either way. And then Houston, they lost by 2. It was a tight game. But now with Utah, we're getting 8 points. So I really like getting the 8 points here. Now, they did beat Cleveland on the road by 19. That's fine. But if we're just looking at something that maybe has a little bit of an edge, I like Utah and taking the 8 points. Now let's look at one of the totals. So Denver and Memphis was the first total that I want to take a look at. So when you're coming up with a total, there's basically 2 numbers you want to look at. Your possessions and your efficiency. So your offensive efficiency, which we can scroll down here and see in some of these little stats, is right here. So your offensive efficiency, that's how many points they score per 100 possessions. So for example, you have our season numbers, we have our last 3 numbers, and we can see our home road splits here. And then I've got these little numbers, I kind of average them out just so I can do a quick calculation when I'm looking through games. The other number that we're looking at is the pace. That is the possessions per game. So here we can see what the season average is, and we can see what it is over the last 3. If you just look at the season, you get kind of a glimpse. And here's a good example. So Memphis on the season, they're 103.6. And then over the last 3 games, they're number 1 in pace at 107.8. Basically, Ja Morant's back, and they're moving a lot faster. So they're averaging almost 108 possessions per game. League average sits about 102. So that kind of gives you an idea of where people are going to come in at 102, 102.5. But then you can see Denver, they are a lot lower at 100.7. So I glance at these 4 numbers here to see if there's a drastic difference. And I believe in the next game is one we're going to see a good example. So you want to get an idea of how many possessions per game, or possessions, these 2 teams are going to average. Well, here's a good example. If you look at the season average, you say, okay, 100, 103, we'll average it out, 101.5. So 101, 102, and then plus or minus 2. So we could say, hey, this is going to be anywhere from 100 to 104, and that would be a justifiable range. But here we can see that Memphis is playing at almost 108, but then Denver's down to 100. Now, this is drastically different because if we use the 108, it's going to give us a monster number. If we use the 100, that's going to give us a lower number. So we are wanting to bet the over of 224.5 points. So we need to figure out which one of these numbers to use. So I want to know what it is with the lowest one of these four numbers. So Denver, they're averaging 100.4 on the season and 100.7 over the last three. So I would say that is the lowest it is going to go. Memphis is going to try to pace up the game. They're going to try to play a lot faster. But if Denver gets their way, they're going to pull this down to about 100 possessions. So 100 is a nice, easy number to work with. So we're going to say, this is going to average 100 possessions for this game. And we know that is the floor. So that's a low scenario. But this could get up around 105 to 108. So we have a little bit of a range. Now coming back over here, looking at the offensive efficiency, we're doing the same thing. We're looking at the season, and then we're looking at the last three. I want to see, are these offenses very efficient? How many points are they scoring? And so this number here, how you calculate this, for example, let's look at the season for Memphis, although this is not a good number since Ja Morant wasn't in there for the majority of games, but this number is 1.036. So that means this team, in 100 possessions, they average 103.6 points. So for Denver, in 100 possessions, they average 114.7 points. So you kind of get an idea of which teams are more efficient. Now, over the last three games, you can see Memphis, they've went from 1.036 to 1.104. So they've moved up about 7 points per 100 possessions, which is a huge uptick in offensive efficiency. So I'm going to use this last three number because Ja Morant's in there, and that, I think, is a more accurate representation of what they're playing at. So we'll say 1.10. So they're going to score 110 points per 100 possessions. And then if we look at Denver, they're at 114 on the season and 1139 over the last three. So 114 is a fair number. So if we take the 1.10 and we're on this up, take 1.14, we're going to average that roughly about 1.12, or this game you could say is going to play at a 2.24 efficiency for 100 possessions. So if you just double this number, so this number here is the average of these two, so 112. So if you double it, that's what we think these two teams should play at. So if you want to look at the season, they would play at 2.18. If we're focusing on the last three, which is what I'm doing since Ja Morant was not in here for the 103, but he is for the 110, then that's going to put us at 112. We double that, so that's going to put us at 2.24. So we're going to say these two teams on the floor, their offensive efficiency combined is going to be 2.24, which means for every 100 possessions, they're going to score 224 points. Now, back over here to the pace per game. We're looking at this. Our lowest number here is 100. So 100 possessions is kind of the floor where this game's going to be. We think it's going to play at a 2.24, so that's going to be 224 points. Well, when we're looking at Vegas, they have a total on this of 224.5. So that's pretty low. We think it's going to go over that number. Now, that doesn't mean the teams are going to come out and shoot like crap and miss a bunch of stuff and not get there. That happens. That's part of the variance. But for a floor, I would put this in about 220, 224. But then this game could also play between 105 and 108. So if you're playing at 108 possessions at a 224, you're going to go way over that number. I don't have my calculator pulled up, but you can know that's over the 224. So over the total is what I like in this Denver-Memphis game, and that is why I like it. Let's look at this other one real quick. And my main thing is I'm trying to explain to you guys what I'm looking at the sheet, how I see this, so you guys can learn like, hey, I'm going to open up this sheet. This is what I'm going to look at. And you guys might notice some nuggets that I don't. So, for example, the Golden State Miami, taking it over in a Miami game is always tough, but 228.5, our model has it at 232, so we have it sliding over. So one thing, I'm going to look at the recent games here. So Miami's recent totals, 232, 235, 221, 220, 234, 240. So you could say they're running 220 to mid 230s, and that's kind of the middle of that is about where the total is, so that's fair. And then looking at Golden State, look at their last 9 games. The lowest they've played is 232, and then they have a bunch mid 230s, 247, 258. So Golden State's doing really well. They are averaging over that total, so that is good. If you glance here at the pace, we're going to see Miami plays at a slower pace. Golden State's playing at a faster pace. We can also see the spread or total trends, home, road, and overall here. So we can see Miami's a 16-4 overplay, Golden State's a 17-13 overplay, and they both play at a slight uptick over the top. Now, looking at possessions and efficiency, again, we want to figure out what is a good pace calculation and what is a good offensive efficiency that these two could play at. So, excuse me, I'm drinking a cup of coffee. So looking at this, we have 100.5, 101.8, that's pretty consistent. 103.9, 102.6, that's within 1. So this one could play anywhere from 100 possessions up to 104-ish, kind of in there. But for numbers' sakes, let's just say 100. That's kind of a floor. It's an easy number to work with to kind of calculate where a total should be. So hopefully you can kind of see where that comes in at. Now over here on your offensive efficiency, you can see 13th and 13th on the season, but they're up to 9th and 6th over the last 3 games, so they're playing a lot better. These two teams on the season are both 1.128, so 112.8, we'll round that up to 113 points per 100 possessions. So that would play at a 226. So in just 100 possessions, we would put this at a 226 total. Well, Vegas has this at 228.5, so that feels low, like it could go over that. But if you look at the last 3 games, they're playing at a 1.16.6, well, 1.166, so 116.6 points per 100 possessions, so we'll say 117. And then Golden State, they're playing up from about 112 to 113 points up to almost 120, so they're at a 1.199. So we're going to say 117, 120. So if we double this, we're going to say this is going to play at a, what's that, a 236. So a 2.36 at 100 possessions is 236 total points, and we've got a total of 228. So that is one that would jump out at me. Now, could this play at 236? Looking at these recent games, yes. 4 of these last 6 games, Miami's been in the 230s. That's a fair number. And then looking at Golden State's last 9 games, they've all been right around that 230 range. So 236, I would say that is a reasonable total to put this game at. So there is a higher probability for me of this game going over the 228 than it is to go under. Now again, it could be one of these games where it comes out at a 210 total, they shoot bad, miss a bunch of shots. That's going to happen. But the majority of the time, I like this to go over. Now, that is how I do my rough calculations. I start at the scoreboard tab. I get an idea what people are averaging over the last 3 games. I'm looking at all our ATS trends and totals. I'm looking at Vegas. I'm looking at my model. I'm looking at the edges. And then I'm looking at the different plays that pop up. I'm making a mark of them. I'm going over here to the bet tab, and I'm going to flip through, and I'm going to look at recent games. I'm going to look at prior matchups. I'm going to look at ATS trends over here, my model, what Vegas has. If you're doing props, you can really get into points from in the paint and three-point land. That's really good for big guys versus three-point shooters. And then we can come down here and we can look at offensive efficiency and then our pace numbers over here and get a good idea of what we think is going to happen. So those are the games that do jump out to me. One of the last things I do is I pull up, and you can go to Vegas Insider, or this is Game Center, and look at the percentage of bets, see kind of where the money is, get an idea what's going on. So here is the NBA games for today. And so we have our open line, we have our current line, it does your total, it does your side, and we have the cash, the tickets, and then people on here, they can pick certain games. I don't really pay attention to that, but I look at the cash. I want to see how much cash money is on one side. So when I'm flipping down this column right here, one of the things that jumps out at me is 100% of the cash is on the over in the Mavericks T-Wolves game, but the lines went from 227 to 226. So even though this is saying a lot of cash is on the over, the line went down. So that tells me there's some sharp money that came in that's pushing it under. So I'm going to stay away from it. That one's not on my radar. Jazz Pelicans. This opened at 7.5. It moved to 8 for the Pelicans. 57% of the money is on the Pelicans. And that's fair. I can see that. They have 57% of the cash, 68% of the tickets. To me, that's still a 50-50 game. I'm going to take these 8 points, and I'm going to go over here with the Jazz. That's the one that I like just based on my model. I'm flipping down here. These are going to change drastically throughout the day as more money comes in on one side. But one of the totals that we do want to look at was the Nuggets and Grizzlies over here. So it's at 228.5. It shot down to 224. Now that's a red flag for me. This has moved 3.5 points to the under. So I would want to go back and look and say, okay, is somebody questionable? Is there someone they think is not going to play? But you can see 75% of the money is on the over and 74% of the tickets. So to me, this is kind of telling us two different stories. It's telling us a lot of people like the over, a lot of money's coming in on the over, but this line shot down 3.5 points, so that's a red flag. If you don't like red flags, don't bet this over. I'm only betting 3 games tonight, so I'm going to go with it anyway for the NBA, but this is one that would jump out and say, hey, maybe I need to hold back or see what's going on, see why this line moved down. And then flipping down here, we can see there's a lot of money. When these are black and red, they've moved in the last, I think, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or 30 minutes. So Heat Warriors, this is the other one. Now, this one is good in our favor. You can see it opened at 225. It moved to 228.5, so it shot up 3.5 points. So typically, a line's going to move where our model is at. So it opened at 225. We have it at 232. It's moved up to 228.5. So if you would have got it when it first came out, you would have had a huge difference. Now it's less of a difference. Now we're about 4.5 points. But we have 95% of the money on the over with a line shift in our favor and 93% of the tickets on the over. So that is good for us. So the Heat Warriors over we do like. So my first bet, if I'm looking at this and I had to rate these 1 through 3, people always ask me, what's your favorite bet? What do you want the most? So I'd say the Heat Warriors over. We got the line move. We've got the majority of the money. Our model likes it. I broke down the possessions and the offensive efficiency. That would be my favorite play on the board right now. The second one would be the Jazz. Now, it moved a 0.5 point against us. I'm not worried about it. It's a dog. Typically, most favorites, it's going to move that way. But the majority of the money, slightly 7% more, is on the other side. But I like the Jazz plus 8 points. That's a personal pick that I like. That would be my number 2. And then I would slide our other one, our Grizzlies Nuggets number 3. I would slide that down to number 3 or a secondary play if I was writing this up because of the 3.5 point downswing. But now we're down to 224 and we were at 224.5. So this could have happened right at the beginning of when they released it. It could have shot down real quick and now it's sitting right around this number. I still like the over, but it's something to take into consideration. So this is kind of what I'm looking at for sports betting picks and how I break it down looking at the NBA cheat sheet. So hope you guys like it, and yep, good luck.